Relationships are hard. They are difficult. Whether it's a business or personal relationship, they are difficult to go through. Ask anyone who has ever been in a management position. If you ask what's the hardest part of their job, they're not going to say doing reports. They're not going to say the added responsibility. 99.9% of them are going to say personnel, managing people, their employees. Now, why is this aspect the most difficult part of the job? Because it's completely reliant on the relationship you have with your employees. There is only one guarantee when it comes to a relationship. Eventually, the relationship ends. With personal relationships, you can grow apart, you can get divorced. Of course, the most ideal way for a personal relationship to end, one of you dies after decades of being married. Business relationships, they can end due to conflict. Perhaps the employee doesn't align with the company values, or just like a personal relationship, you eventually grow apart. The company is heading in one direction, you're heading in another direction. Or you have accomplished all you can with the company. You've reached the top of the mountain, the pinnacle of success. There is nowhere else for you to go or grow. You have bigger goals, bigger aspirations that can only be accomplished by dissolving the relationship. That last statement, that is where I believe Stephen A. Smith is finding himself in his relationship with ESPN. For months now, I have been saying Stephen A. Smith is laying the foundation for his eventual departure from the worldwide leader in woke. Many of you have agreed with this prediction. Some people think I'm insane. This is absolutely ludicrous. He's making $12 million a year and will receive a substantial raise with his new contract. Yeah, sure. Some people think since ESPN broke the bank for Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, they're going to break the bank to keep Stephen A. Smith. I don't think the money given to Joe Buck and Troy Aikman sits well with Stephen A. To be honest with you, I can understand why. You're the face of the network. You put in more hours than any other on-air personality at ESPN. 2 hours of live television every morning, multiple nights every week covering the NBA, big UFC events, NFL playoffs, the Super Bowl. Joe Buck, Troy Aikman, they show up one night a week, make substantially more money than you do. The difference is Monday Night Football draws the biggest audience on the network, while First Take's doing well if they draw 500,000 viewers. Sometimes you gotta be willing to read between the lines. Stephen A. Smith, he's not gonna come out publicly and say, I'm leaving ESPN, damn it, I'm unhappy here. But over the last several months, he has been dropping these subtle hints. Some hints deal with his dissatisfaction at the network. Prime example, when he complained publicly a couple of months ago on First Take about being vastly underpaid. Satisfied employees, happy employees, they don't voice their frustrations publicly. I thought the biggest hint was Stephen A. Smith launching a podcast that is completely separate from ESPN. Stephen A. owns 100% of the rights to his show. Contractually, ESPN has nothing to do with his podcast. Right now, he is saying publicly that he launched the show to be able to speak about political issues that he doesn't have the freedom to speak about on ESPN's airwaves. The truth is, as long as he is under contract with ESPN, Stephen A. does not have freedom. The fact that ESPN has no control over his podcast, that doesn't mean shit. It doesn't matter. As long as he is the face of the network, what Stephen A. says directly reflects on the worldwide leader in woke. Meaning, he has to fall in line. Earlier this week, Stephen A. dropped a few more hints about his potential future with ESPN. Again, you gotta be willing to read between the lines here. You gotta open your mind to what he's really trying to say. Stephen A. was a guest on Pat McAfee. Pat McAfee opens the show promoting Stephen A.'s new podcast. Stephen A., though, he immediately shifts the conversation to the environment at ESPN, the reasoning behind launching an independent platform. Now, I'm going to break down these clips into a couple of segments. I was actually surprised to find out when I was listening to this I'm not the only one that struggles with audio issues. These guys have access to professional sound engineers, and the audio on both ends is god awful. But listen to Stephen A's supposed reason for launching a platform separate from ESPN. Roll the film.
It's not a sports podcast. I touch on politics. I touch on pop culture and entertainment. I'm not limited, and that's the reason why. If it was just sports, it would be something for ESPN because it doesn't get much better than that in the world of sports. But to me, I didn't want to be limited and confined to the world of sports. It was important to me to be able to expand my horizons and step out beyond that because there's a lot of politics, social issues, pop culture and entertainment, Kanye West to Kyrie, the list goes on and on. I like to be able to talk about all of it and not be limited by it. And I couldn't do that doing a sports podcast for ESPN.
Okay, what did he just say here? Read between the lines. Stephen A just said he needed a platform to talk about politics, social issues. He referenced wanting freedom, talking about off-the-court issues with Kyrie Irving, not being able to do that at ESPN. Correct me if I'm wrong. Last NBA season, this time last year, Stephen A. Smith destroyed Kyrie Irving numerous times on ESPN's airways because Kyrie refused to get vaccinated. So why would he need a separate platform to discuss Kyrie? I've lost count of how many times Stephen A has discussed social and political issues on ESPN. Hell, everyone talks politics at ESPN. Elle Duncan, Malika Andrews, Mike Wilbon, Max Kellerman, J.A. Adonde, Sarah Spain, the woman who got a job in sports media by auctioning herself on a dating site. Stephen A. Smith wants me to believe that he doesn't have the freedom to speak politically on the most political network in sports media? I ain't buying it. Guess who else didn't bite into this shit sandwich? Pat McAfee. Pat McAfee, he appeared dumbfounded. He pushed back, which I actually commend him for doing this because most shitfucks in the media, they would have allowed Stephen A to slide on the bullshit. They would have eaten the shit sandwich ass for seconds. Pat McAfee, he was not buying this reasoning. Watch it for yourself.
Because I thought there was a time there where that was almost being promoted at some sports networks, not just ESPN, but everywhere. Was that something that you thought you wanted to do more of because they were telling you to do more of there for a time? Or was there a conversation about you should do less politics on ESPN? Or did you just feel like it wasn't the right time or place and you're looking for the right time or place and that's on No Mercy where you can really dive in a little bit deeper? Or how'd that all come about?
When Jimmy Pitaro came on board, obviously he made a concerted effort for us not to get into politics per se. And I want to tell you that I stood up and support him on that, and I still do, because we did get to a point over the years at ESPN where it was too much politics. It was the politicization of too many different things. When I step away and I have other interests, there's nothing wrong with that either. And then the argument was that I was such a big name that whenever you say Stephen A. Smith, that's synonymous with ESPN. Well, also, I'm proud to be a member of ESPN. Please don't get me wrong. And when it comes to sports, I have no issue with it whatsoever. But if I feel some way about a presidential election or something a politician is doing or something that's going on in the streets of America, that's my personal opinion. And I think one of the things that people had a struggle really expressing to the brass is that when you muzzle everybody, any little opinion that emanates from ESPN, everybody thinks it's everybody, it's all of us.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. Why is it that we can't stand on our own and make sure everybody understands these opinions are not reflective of the network? They're just mine.
Got it.
And in order to do that, you have to separate yourself from it to send that message. And that's what I did.
Okay, more good bullshit from Stephen A. Smith. This is another classic example of someone in media giving you a partial truth. Yes, when Jimmy Pitaro took over at ESPN, he issued a directive that there would be no politics on the network. He made an example of Jemele Hill by firing her dumbass and cutting off her woke welfare. But this no politics directive, it lasted 6, maybe 12 months? Now the directive still exists, but it was slightly modified, just a little bit modified. Politics are not allowed at ESPN if you're a common sense thinker. Politics are not allowed at ESPN if you support someone like Ron DeSantis. However, politics are allowed if you're willing to tag team the woke cucumber. Promoting mythical racism with Rachel Richardson? Allowed. Claiming Will Thomas is a sign of progress in women's sports? Allowed. Promoting Tran Fran as the All-American man? Allowed. Sage Still speaks negatively about the fungus named Fauci? Taken off the air. Stephen A. He said something I thought was revealing. He said he needed to step away from ESPN to be able to express his personal opinion. He referenced the fact that when he or someone else express personal opinions, everyone at ESPN gets labeled with the same opinion. He talked about the brass, the executives at ESPN, muzzling certain voices. He said he has to separate himself from ESPN to essentially have his own voice. Okay. So what does all this mean? For 2 years, I have said Stephen A is the world's highest paid parrot. Reason I say that, I don't think he really believes what he says on ESPN's airwaves. I feel like he is given a script of talking points. He's told to repeat them. That's why we're paying you. Because the Stephen A you see on ESPN is completely different than the Stephen A you see on Fox News. Multiple times, he referenced the need to step away from ESPN. Multiple times. But while he's under contract, he's not truly stepping away. He's still under their umbrella, their control. He told Pat McAfee, when it comes to politics, he's a fair-minded person, which is great. That's fine. But you can't be a woke shitfuck on Woke Take and be a fair-minded person on your podcast. There is no such thing as fair-minded in the woke movement. You're either in or you're out. You can't be both because you sacrifice your credibility. I will ask the same question I've asked many times before. Who is the real Stephen A. Smith? The guy we see on Woke Take screaming about mythical racism, whining about the vaccination status of Kyrie Irving, or the fair-minded man we hear on his podcast or see on Fox News? Who's the real guy? The guy who claims to be tough on crime, the guy who wants to see criminals in prison? Who's the real Stephen A. Smith? Let me ask you something. How many times has Stephen A. made headlines from something he has said on his podcast? We see him make headlines every single week for woke political statements on First Take. He is claiming to launch this podcast so he can express his own personal opinions that he hasn't been allowed to express at ESPN. How many times has he done that? How many times has he made headlines for doing so? To my knowledge, none. Why? Why? If the sole purpose of your podcast is to have the ability to express your personal ideology, why is it not happening? Now, I'll admit, I have not listened to all of his podcasts. I've listened to some of them. I see where he's interviewed Sean Hannity, see where he's talked about January 6th, Donald Trump. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe we're hearing the real Stephen A on his podcast while he's still under contract with ESPN. But I have my doubts. Here's what I think is going to happen. His contract ends with ESPN at the end of this year. He launched this platform back in September to give him a full year, over a full year, to build the platform, build the audience. He has seen the success of guys like Dan Le Batard, Dan Patrick, Pat McAfee, leaving ESPN, becoming your own boss. I think Stephen A. Smith is going to demand $20 million a year from ESPN, knowing he ain't going to get it. He knows they can't afford to pay him $20 million while he's drawing 500,000 viewers. If Disney separates from ESPN, damn sure ain't happening. But I don't think this is about the money for Stephen A. Smith. I think it's about the freedom. I think he's in the same position I was in 2 years ago, although obviously his position much larger scale. You can't put a price on freedom. Why would you want to wake up early every morning, report to work, report to the office, report to some boss, be forced to say things that you probably don't agree with, when you could wake up every morning, walk downstairs to your own studio, be your own boss, keep all the money to yourself, and have the same reach? I would not be surprised if the next move Stephen A. Smith makes launching a YouTube channel. Starting in 2023, his podcast will be in video format. Where's the best place to do that? YouTube. Who will he be competing with on the platform? ESPN. All the signs are there. All the signs are there. You just got to be willing to read between the lines. But give me your thoughts. Do you think this interview with Pat McAfee offered further proof that Stephen A. Smith is planning a departure from ESPN? Let me know. Sound off in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe. Click the notification bell to receive all notifications from the channel. Best way to contact me is by email at btlkc84@gmail.com, KC_BTL84 on Twitter. I'll see you guys tomorrow.